welcome back to the third video painting class for the Clearwater Library. I'm going to go over the materials that you will need. If you've done the past two classes, you should have everything you need to paint what we're going to paint today. But in case you're joining for the first time, I'm going to go through it with you. We'll need a square canvas. This is just the canvases at Michael's that come in the multi-packs. I believe they're 12 by 12. We're gonna need just some primary colors. I do the Artist Loft. It's the cheapest one that Michael sells. We're gonna do it in a deep yellow, brilliant red, ultramarine for the blue, and then do titanium white. This one we use the most out of anything because we use it for mixing a lot. So don't be surprised if you run out of this one when you're doing multiple classes. We will use black as well, but you can use a much smaller tube for black because we use it pretty sparingly in these paintings. I'm using just the tail end of a tube of the Liquitex Basics black, but Artist Loft also makes a black. Just make sure it's not the metallic black. They do not serve the same purpose. For brushes, you're just gonna need a bigger brush for covering bigger areas, a thinner brush for outlining things, and then sort of like a medium brush. These were a 3-pack at Michael's for about $5, so nothing fancy. You do want to make sure you have some soft bristled brushes though. It'll make your paintings a lot smoother. We're gonna need paper towels to dry our brushes off on, disposable cup with water, and a paper plate for mixing your paint. You might want to put something down below where you're painting if you're worried about getting anything on the table, if you are going to paint the sides of your canvas or not. But it's up to you if you feel brave, like I do. You can just use some paper towels. All right, we're going to get started. Today we are going to paint a winter scene with some snow and some trees. A little different than what we get here in Florida, but we can wish. So we're gonna make a painting of that. It's gonna be pretty simplistic and pretty gestural, so don't feel too intimidated by this. Landscapes are generally pretty easy. They don't have to be super detailed or super realistic. They can be a little bit whimsical. So we're gonna go with that today to make it nice and simple for us. We're going to be using a lot of blues and purples in this painting just because it is a winter scene. So to counterbalance that, we are going to do some warm colors in the sky on the background. So we're going to start with that. I'm going to take your red and mix our first color. Actually, I'm going to mix a couple colors. So I'm going to do just like a little glob of red, not a ton. I'm going to do the same with the yellow. Put them a little bit further apart so you can kind of mix them, not right next to each other. And then we're going to use quite a bit of white. So off to the side, we'll put a much bigger glob of white. We'll be using it quite a bit. With your big brush, we're gonna start with like a hazy pink. It's gonna go down into yellow and then into white. So for that, we're going to take a little bit of this red, put it off to the side, take a little scoop of this white, and blend it till we get this nice pastel like pink color. It's kind of like a peachy pink. And we're just gonna brush that right across the top. About the width of your brush. You don't need a ton of this, but we're gonna about maybe an inch or so down. And then you don't have to rinse your brush quite yet. We're gonna do the same thing, but we're going to take a little scoop of that yellow and just mix it right into that pink that we were using, and take a tiny bit more white. So it'll be like a nice peachy yellow. We're gonna put that stripe right below the peach we made. Now mixing this wet into wet will be a lot easier to blend it and kind of make this gradation. So you just want to kind of softly brush it across. You don't want to brush it up and down. You want to keep it straight across like that. If your paint is dragging at all, just take a tiny dip of water and you'll be able to smooth it out. Once we get down a little further with this yellow peachy color, we're just gonna dip straight into our white, and we're gonna put it right below that peach color so that we can kind of smooth that down into a lighter color. You don't want it to look too stripy. You just want it to kind of look like maybe like a sunset or sunrise, just like very soft. If you find that you're having anything too harsh going on, line-wise, edge-wise, you just take a little bit of water and you can kind of just smooth out some areas. But you do want to do that while this is still wet. If it starts to dry and you try and do that, you're just going to pick up the paint that you've already put down. So we're just going to leave this like this. It's really nice and soft. Let's see what we're going to do next. I'm going to have to mix like a purple, a light purple. So you should still have some red on your plate. I'm going to put some blue over here. We should still have plenty of white as well. So we're going to start with sort of a warmer purple and fade it down to a cooler purple. So how we're going to do that is you're going to split this red. I'm going to take a little dab of this red right here. Take a tinier dab of blue and mix that. So it's sort of like a warm start to this purple. I'm gonna put a tiny glob of white so we can kind of see. It's not quite purple yet, it's more of a mauve-y, so we're gonna put a little more blue in it. So we'll get like a nice warm lavender color. That's looking pretty good. I'm gonna put a tiny bit more red in it just so it's a little darker as well. Now, right next to it, we're gonna put a slightly cooler version, almost like just a light blue, bluish purple. So start with our blue. You can keep whatever's on your brush. Just kind of mix whatever's in your brush with that blue. Put maybe a tiny bit of white. This is more like a periwinkle color. The red that you had in your brush from this is just enough to tint it. So these colors are nice and similar, but they're different enough to where we can get a nice gradation. So we'll rinse out our brush. So we can start with that warm color. What we're gonna do is we're gonna make some mountain lines in the back here. We're gonna start with that warmer purple. And we're gonna take the edge of this brush and just sort of right over where like this ends, I'm gonna do it a little further up, just to make sure the canvas is covered. And there's no rhyme or reason to this, you just wanna make some peaks, some valleys. We're going to paint down from that line. Doesn't have to be super dark or super solid. This is just gonna be in the background, and we kind of want it to look a little hazy because it's gonna be pretty far off from the other things we're gonna be putting in this painting. Now while this is still wet, we're gonna dip into that cooler blue color. Again, keeping what you have on your brush. And we're gonna blend it in just underneath that warmer purple color. Now to keep it a nice soft blend, you wanna just be really, really light-handed with your brush. The harder you push with the brush, the more of those streaks you'll see. Okay, so we got a nice little mountain range here. Gonna rinse our brush again. Start one more time with that warmer color, warmer purple. Should be almost out of it by now. Not a ton. I'm going to just sort of paint another ridge here. Kind of following what I already painted. And then again, dip back into that cooler purple, whatever you've got left of it. And go right underneath. So it looks like there's 2 rows of mountains back here. Now from there, we're going to take a dab of this white and mix it into that cooler color. And we're gonna bring that down. We're gonna blend it with this bottom layer of the mountains. So do that nice soft blending like you did up here. Really, really soft. We're going to kind of drag that down to about here. Get a little water if you need it. It's gonna be loose. There's gonna be things painted in front of this, so don't worry about it being like a super opaque painting. We're just trying to get some of this really light color brought down. So make sure everything's nice and smooth. Really soft. We've already got part of the landscape down. If for any reason you are painting a little slower, you want to go back and fix things, feel free to pause the video. I know I go pretty quickly. Usually in my classes, I kind of keep an eye on where people are at because we're in person, but over video, I can't really see how quickly each person is painting. So feel free to pause it if I'm going too quick and just finish the step and then unpause it to go to the next step. So while this is drying, it's a pretty thin coat, so it should dry fairly quickly. If you were a little heavy-handed and got a thick layer of paint, you're gonna wanna pause the video and let it dry before we go to the next step. But I'm gonna go ahead and forge ahead in this step with this. So we're gonna mix a darker purple. So we're gonna take the rest of this red here, put it into this blue. If you're out of those colors on your palette, just put a little bit extra down on your plate. I'm gonna need a little bit more red in mine. And we're gonna need a tiny bit of black. A tiny bit for now. We don't need a lot. So I'm just gonna put it on like the edge of my plate over here, just to pull from really slowly. Get in there in my brush. Get that out. Let's get a little bit more of this red into this blue here. It's gonna be like a really deep plum, like a midnight purple color. I'm gonna take a tiny bit of white to lighten it up so we can kind of see where we're at. It's like a nice slate purple. And we're gonna put a tiny bit of black. It does not take much at all, just to make sure that this remains like a nice deep opaque color. It's much easier to add black in like tiny bits than to kind of back out and have to dilute it if it's too dark. You waste a lot of paint doing that. So just be very sparing as you add in black to any of these colors. We'll be doing it quite often in this painting compared to the other ones that we've done. So we're going to use this color to sort of map out a snowbank and like a tree line. We'll be kind of playing back and forth with layers here to get like a nice snowy landscape. So the first thing we're gonna do is kind of establish where the foreground is. I'm gonna start maybe 2 2.5, 3 inches or so up here. And we're just gonna kind of slowly slope it down like this. Nothing major, just like a curvy line, just kind of however you want to do it. We're also going to be putting some little trees back here. They're going to be background trees. So we're going to have a forest line, but we're going to have it done in layers. So we'll do a few over here, just using the edge of your brush, or if you'd rather use the small brush, feel free. I'm going to do maybe like 4 here. It's like little tally marks almost. Do 3 here. Do 2. Another 2. And then maybe trail off a bunch on this side. You kind of want to keep them down at the same level. I kind of went off like this, so I'm going to bring some of my lines down. Just so they're a little more in line. I'm gonna rinse out my brush. In between steps, if we're not using the brush, make sure you rinse it in your cup. This paint dries pretty quick and it can ruin your brushes really quickly if you leave them out on your plate and let the paint dry on them. It'll be very difficult to use. So be good to your brushes. Rinse those out. We're gonna take a smaller brush and we're gonna dip right into that dark color again, and we're gonna kind of fill these trees out. Now, they're just pine trees. Pine trees are fairly easy to make, so you just wanna keep them as a cone. You don't wanna make them the same width all the way down. So you're just gonna go from the center trunk and you're just gonna kinda just do some swipes down. Kind of like a little Christmas tree. You know. Pine trees are nice and really easy if you're just doing silhouetted versions of them. Very simple. You want to make sure they're varying in height and width. The ones that are close together, you won't really see the details of them. They'll kind of blend together, and that's fine. But we want to make sure that we're conveying that this is like in the wild. This isn't like a Christmas tree lot. You know, we want them all to be kind of scattered in the background like a natural forest. Be Bob Ross today. These happy little trees. And again, these are just in the background, so don't feel pressure to make these perfect. A lot of this stuff will get covered by bigger trees in the foreground, so don't feel like you have to put a ton of energy or worry into these little trees in the back. They are not the star of this painting. These all mapped in. I'm gonna make sure they look nice and thick, the silhouettes, so make sure you don't just see the trunks standing out too harshly. Oh, cool, we got a little back tree line there. Now we're gonna put a little bit of snow on these back ones early. So the way we're gonna do that is we're gonna take a little bit of this white and kind of just mix it with what we have in our brush. So it's like this color, but like much, much lighter. A little bit more. really, really light color. We don't want it to be stark white because these are in the background, so they're gonna look a little fainter. So we're gonna tap some snow on these with this little brush, and it's just like really kind of random. Looks like snow's settling on these trees. Again, this is not super realism or really detailed. You're just kind of tapping a little bit of this light color to kind of show that these trees have been covered in snow recently. And honestly, you can just let your brush do the work. The brush makes cool, weird shapes, like as you just kind of tap it down. So you don't have to like really draw anything out. You're just kind of doing like a stippling, just like a textured effect. You might want to like double it up in some areas so it's not too dotty or repetitive looking, so it does look a little more natural. But for the most part, this is a very minimal part. This is just going to add to the depth of your painting. All right. We're going to mix a little more of that dark color, because we're going to map in the trees better in the foreground. Well, these are going to be much darker. So, actually, I have some black on there already. I'm going to do a little heavier on the blue. Maybe do like a dime-sized amount. So we'll do another scoop of this red into this blue, make this purpley color. I want it to be nice and deep colored. Put a dab of white in there just to kind of see where we're at. Helps you kind of see what's going on. Don't do too much because we still want this to be pretty dark. That's about the color we want, but we want a tiny bit darker, so we're gonna put a little more black in here. We basically want these trees to be much lighter. We want the stuff that's closer to you to be darker, because presumably the sun is back here, so it's kind of, everything back here is gonna look kind of faded and light, like it's off in the distance. These trees that are in front are gonna be really dark. And they're just going to be sort of silhouetted like these trees back here. So they're not going to be very detailed. They are going to be much darker though, which will help make them look like they're standing in front. Okay, so we have this nice, like really deep midnight color. We're going to plop some trees in here. So we'll do one, let's do one kind of in between these trees. You want this to kind of come down in front of your line. Don't make the line too fat. Just use the edge of your brush. If you want to use a smaller brush, that would also be fine. Do one here. Let's do kind of a smaller one here. Let's do one here. I'm doing kind of in front of these trees. A little bit. Do one on the edge here, and then maybe a small one kind of going in front of these trees here. Perfect. Got these big trees mapped in. Now you can use a smaller brush for this. I'm going to start with the larger brush to get some of this in here first, and then go in with the tiny brushes. We're gonna use the same dark color. We're gonna do sort of like what we did back here, but maybe a little more intentional, a little more defined with your shape. These could be a little blurry because they're in the back, but we want to be a little, use a little more finesse with these trees. Make sure we're kind of tapering off at the ends so that they're nice and sharp and pretty. And I got the bottom leave like a little curve there. They don't all have to look the same because trees don't really all look the same, so it's kind of, this is kind of the nice part. You can kind of zone out and just make these trees look nice. And don't feel like you have to fill in little spots like this. These little areas are what's going to make it look like these are real silhouetted trees instead of, you know, like a hedge. Like being able to see through that is a nice effect. So I'm just gonna big loosely map these in, and then I'll take my little brush and kind of add some detail. But just to make this process a little quicker, I'll do it this way. I'm already running out of this color, so I'm gonna mix a tiny bit more. You may be too. And it's kind of like when you're gonna be mixing another color, doing a tree line or something, if you do sort of like how I did, how you do them randomly, and you mix the other color, it'll look like, instead of it going from one color to another, in case you have to remix that color, if you kind of scatter them, it'll look intentional. If you don't quite mix it the exact same way the second time, it won't matter. It will look like you meant to do that. So again, we're gonna start with the blue, do this little half of red. Let's get that mixed in here. I like to mix it in the same spot so I get some of that other paint picked back up. A tiny bit of that white, see where we're at. We'll do a little bit of this black. Perfect. It's almost like a navy, a really deep navy. So let's go in. Make this one going off the canvas a little bit. I want this bottom line to be pretty much covered. These trees are going to be in front of it here. So we want to kind of bring out our trees. If you find that you have a big gap where you're not covering that line, you can make your trees a little wider, or you can just add another tree. But we want to kind of cover that little line we made for reference. Make sure we're not seeing it through our tree line here. Make sure we're not seeing the trunks through the trees. Should be looking pretty solid. I'm gonna use a smaller brush so we can get some little details here. If you want to get nice fine lines with a smaller brush, you can always just dip a tiny bit of water. It'll help the paint be a little more fluid. You won't be dragging against the texture of the canvas, especially if you're like me and you've primed over this canvas like 12 times. You kind of want to be able to get past those paint lines and bumps. extra detail, finesse into this painting. Make these trees look nice and furry. A small brush is also good. If you find the tops of your trees are a little blunted, you can make them a little taller, a little sharper. We can also put some detail into the bottoms here if they're looking a little scrubby. As well as fill in some of these little areas that might be not quite as solid as we want. Now we're gonna need to let these trees dry completely before we go to the next step. So we're gonna pause here and let this dry, especially if you've put on thick paint. We'll just need to let it dry a little extra. Fan always works if you need to, but we'll be back for the next step. Make sure to rinse out your brushes in between while you're letting it dry. Don't let your brushes get all dried up. All right, we are back. By now your painting should be dry. Gonna add some layers on now. We actually don't have much more to do on this painting. This is kind of a shorter session. We're gonna start with a lighter blue. I still have a bunch of white on my palette that is not dry. If you do not have any white, go ahead and put some on your palette. We're also gonna be using some more blue. So just a little dab of blue. We're gonna make a really faint blue color. So I'm gonna kind of mix it over here. Gonna start with a little scoop of blue like that. Put it off to the side. Take a nice healthy glob of white. Kind of mix it in there. We're gonna use this to add some texture to this bottom half, put some snow in. So the first thing we're gonna do with the wider brush, we're going to kind of just cleanly brush it in, kind of around, not over where your tree texture is, so just sort of underneath it. Again, we're not covering the whole thing. We're just laying down like this nice soft layer of blue here. We will be going back over with a little white, so if you find that you mess something up, we can always kind of come back. If you go over your texture of your trees too much, we'll be able to use a little bit of black when we go in and define these trees. You can bring it out a little more, or you can take the white later on and kind of cut back into your tree and remake that texture that you had. So no big deal. We're going to also use this just very faintly for some accent marks on the tree. So the way we're gonna do that is we're gonna sort of dry brush it. We don't wanna create anything too dark because we are gonna keep going back into the trees after we use this blue color. So what you'll wanna do is dry your brush off or wipe this excess paint off. Just kind of tap it very lightly into your blue. Wanna kind of make it very light. We're gonna just lightly kind of brush some texture into these trees. This will help the trees in front stand out from the trees that are kind of behind it. So when you have trees like this that are real close together, kind of imagine which ones you want in the front. Any of the ones that are taller, you're gonna want to put in the front. The smaller ones, you'll want to keep in the back like that. I'm just kind of using the edge of my brush, kind of keep everything nice and thin strokes, nice and soft. This light blue is really good for just kind of defining these trees a little bit. We will be going back with black and kind of putting more contrast and texture into these trees. So don't go too crazy with this, just use it a little bit, kind of help these trees stand out a little bit. I'm gonna go pretty quickly with this, so if you need to slow it down, just pause the video and take your time putting this texture in. Put a little bit on this one back here. Cool, so we've got most of this texture in the trees. I'm gonna rinse our brush out. And we're gonna actually just use some straight black, which is something we rarely do in these paintings, but I'm gonna put a little more on my palette, just make sure I've got enough. I just need a tiny amount. Now with a smaller brush, I'm gonna do is just use it to kind of go around the areas deep into the trees. You don't want to go over the light colors that you did. You just want to put a little bit of texture kind of between those areas, just to give the trees a little more dimension. It's okay that these trees in the very back are kind of flat because they're in the background. They're not really the focus of the painting. So we're just gonna take our little brush and do a miniature version of what we were doing with that light blue. Just kind of using the edge of it and just putting a little bit of contrast into these trees. Again, you can use this either now or at the end in order to define little branches and stuff. If you find that you kind of prematurely went over some areas that you didn't want to, you can kind of go back and forth with these colors and redefine areas that you want to be a little more specific or sharp. Okay, you don't have to do too much of it. You just want a little bit, kind of make these trees stand out. Give them a little depth and texture. Nice. All right, the last step we're gonna do is actually just white. So I'm gonna take our white paint, a nice healthy glob down. We'll be using a little bit of that. That's actually probably way more than you need. You probably need about half that. It's not gonna take too much, but we will be using it quite a bit. So make sure that down here is dry. It should be a nice thin layer, so it should be dry. If it's not dry, if this is still thick and wet, pause your video and let it dry, because you don't want, same with the black, when we go into these trees, you don't want it to be super wet, because the white won't stand out if you do it that way. So we're gonna take our bigger brush, dip into this white here, and very softly, you can actually even water it down to kind of see a little bit of that blue through it. But we're gonna very softly kind of go over these little snowy textures here. Again, be mindful of the bottoms of your trees. If you want to go up to them, you can, but just make sure you're going with the trees like this, so that you're not missing all that texture that you spent time putting in. We're gonna do it more toward the top. We're gonna let down here stay a little bit blue. We're gonna mostly just put a nice milky white over top of this, so it looks like, you know, the light is hitting the snow. The blue is kind of like where the shadows are of the snow. Very lightly with your brush, put a little texture into these mountains as well. Okay, just a little bit, not a ton. You don't want to, you know, draw too much attention to the background. We want it to still sit really soft in the background. A good way to keep it nice and soft is to just keep a little bit of water on your brush, so that it's real light and translucent and isn't too harsh. I like to make sure there's not a ton of paint in my brush, just so it's not really thick and opaque. But we want to put a little bit of texture in these mountains back here. Again, don't come down into your tree line, just kind of, you know, keep your trees untouched. Don't want to be going over the trees with this. We're also going to put a little bit of clouds back here. Just in this light part, we're going to keep them really light. The way I do clouds is I try and keep the bottoms fairly flat, and then I just sort of build like a puffy, almost like a mountainscape on top of that. But I keep the bottoms pretty flat across the horizon. Not all clouds are shaped like that, but it's a nice way to do clouds in a painting like this. I'm just gonna do two small ones. If you do clouds running up and down, it kind of ruins the effect of it being this like horizontal landscape, because clouds don't really do that unless they're like over top of you. When you're looking at them from a distance, they do run side to side for the most part. So it's just, it'll help it look a little more authentic and true to the sky if you keep them nice and light and horizontal. Okay, the last part is that we're going to take some of this white and we're going to make some sparkly snow on these trees. You do want to make sure that your black is completely dry. A good way to check is if you tilt it and it's really shiny, it's probably still wet. You can even dab it with your finger and see. Mine's fairly dry, so I'm going to do this with this small brush. I'm going to make sure my brush is clean and dry. And we're gonna use this paint, the white paint, much thicker when we're applying the snow compared to how we were softly brushing it in on the bottom and the top. This we're gonna use kind of thicker paint, so it's like really, really white, really kind of lumpy. You can even layer it up and get really textured with it if you want. But we're gonna take this small brush, make sure it's got plenty of paint on it, and we're just gonna like kind of dab the snow on. It's kind of hard to see. But you want to keep it really kind of speckly because the snow is like just barely catching on these needles. You don't want any big globs of the white. It'll look a lot less realistic if you do it that way. So we're just gonna kind of follow these lines on the branches and just make it look like powdery, you know, thick clumps of snow. And the reason we didn't put white on these back here is because they're in the background, so we want them to kind of fade into the background. So putting this really stark white snow on these trees in the front will help these look like they're right in front of you. So we don't need to do a ton, just make it look like they've been slowly dusted with snow. If it helps to do the ones that you have in front, just so you don't forget and accidentally put the snow from the trees behind on front. You don't want to get too mixed up with what's in the foreground, what's in the background. So we'll do that. We'll put the snow on these trees in front here. Just be kind of, you know, really, really light-handed. Kind of using dots and kind of letting your brush make the shape of the little clumps of snow for you. That way you're not doing little tiny circles or having to really think about the shapes. This is just more of a kind of tapping in some texture here. And a nice, fun, cathartic way to paint. Again, if you feel like I'm going too fast, just pause the video and fill in your trees at whatever speed you want. I like to work pretty quickly. We're gonna do with this white, so we're gonna put a little bit of texture and sparkle down the snow. It'll be subtle. We're gonna kind of where you see more of the blue, just do the same thing, kind of dab some thick dots so it looks like the snow is kind of sparkly, kind of catching the light a little bit. If you want to up the texture in your snow, you can actually go back in with this light blue that you have. You should still have a little bit on your palette. You can go back with that and make a little bit more texture. Look really, really glittery down here. we go. We've made a nice little winter snowscape. If you wanted to, you could add more mountains in the back. You could add more trees, even tinier off in the distance. You could add a sun. You could maybe do one peeking back behind here, like an orange sun. But we're gonna leave it pretty simple for now, just like a nice quiet sunrise or sunset scene, whatever you'd like it to be. I will see you all next time. We'll be using the same supplies for the next round of classes. And I will have all new designs for you. Thank you for joining us. Bye.